Добрий день.
Доброго дня, шановні друзі. Сподіваюся, мене гарно чутно. Будь ласка, напишіть, якщо комусь не чутно або некомфортно. Мене звати Тетяна Міськова, я виконуюча обов'язки Офісу з просування експорту України. І на початку цього семінару хотіла би попросити людей, які не є спікерами, будь ласка, відключити мікрофони для того, щоб вам всім було комфортно чути один одного. Хочу ще раз всіх привітати, подякувати за участь, за те, що ви прагнете знань. Сьогодні, отже, ми починаємо третю зустріч, серії зустрічі Expert Talks, яку ми робимо з нашими партнерами Ukrainian Business and Trade Association. Принагідно хочу повідомити, що сьогодні ми підписали з асоціацією меморандум про взаєморозуміння. Я дуже дякую партнерам, а також партнерам Covington & Burling LLP за підтримку цих семінарів. Отже, сьогодні про що будемо говорити? Хочу сказати і подякувати бізнесу за ті питання, які ви нам надсилаєте, тому що наш порядок денний ми будуємо відповідно до ваших відгуків і ваших запитань. Отже, сьогодні ми будемо говорити про Green Deal і про стратегію Євросоюзу від ферми до виделки, і будемо говорити про тенденції озеленення і тенденції запровадження сталого розвитку Євросоюзу і вплив цих тенденцій на міжнародну торгівлю, а також на експорт до Євросоюзу. Отже, сьогодні будемо говорити про ці всі процеси і будемо намагатися відповісти на питання щодо того, які ризики можуть бути пов'язані і можуть вплинути на українських експортерів, які можливості нові відкриваються, які нові вимоги, а також, що важливо, яка є система підтримки, куди йти українському експортеру, де шукати відповіді на свої запитання. Ця тема дуже актуальна, тому що навіть під час нашої роботи експорт-промоушен офісу на хелпдеску дуже часто звертаються компанії і дуже багато питань саме по технічних вимогах, сертифікації і так далі і тому подібне. Тому наразі не буду затримувати, довго забирати час. Хочу передати слово пану Назару Бобицькому, який є директором Брюссельського офісу Ukrainian Business and Trade Association для подальшої модерації даного заходу. Будь ласка, Назаре.
Дякую, Тетяна. Ми вже втретє зустрічаємося з вами в цьому ефірі і втретє з нашими слухачами. Мене звати Назар Бобицький і наша команда в Українській асоціації бізнесу і торгівлі спільно з Офісом просування експорту маємо велику честь сьогодні говорити на наступну тему. Якою стане аграрна політика ЄС вже завтра? І як це відіб'ється на перспективах експорту української харчової продукції на європейський ринок? Сьогодні з нами дуже компетентні, цікаві спікери. Я маю честь вітати виконувачку обов'язків голови Держпродспоживслужби України пані Ольгу Шевченко, а також старшого радника компанії Covington & Burling, колишнього керівника делегації ЄС на переговорах з Україною щодо зон вільної торгівлі, посла Пітера Балаша. And now we switch to English. How we structure our discussion today. First, Ambassador Balash will discuss with us the updated from farm to fork strategy, which was presented by the European Commission in late May. He will demonstrate how the EU approach to production, consumption and trade in agri-food products will be profoundly changed under the influence of the European Green Deal. Then he will look at several EU policy priorities that will guide the EU legislation on agri-food products in the next several years. This is how to lower the impact of climate change, how to slow down and reverse degradation of environment, and how to improve food security. And last but not least, this is very important policy objective to come from the EU side, is how to help consumers choose over more healthy products. Very importantly, all of these policy trends will have influence on later EU legislation regarding imports of agri-food products from third countries, including Ukraine. This is why we believe that this topic is important for our exporters. We will be looking for specific areas such as animals and plant health requirements. After that, Ms. Olga Shevchenko will give her comments from the perspective of the Ukrainian Food Safety and Consumer Protection Service. And then we will look forward to a lively discussion between our speakers. At the end of the webinar, the speakers will be able to answer those questions we received from our audience. Now I will switch on the screen the presentation of Ambassador Balash. So I hope the presentation the first slide is well on screen. And Ambassador Balash, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to have this opportunity after an earlier webinar to speak again with my Ukrainian friends and to be back to Ukraine, at least through the internet, after all the many visits I did as the head of the European Commission support group to Ukraine. I would like to put the discussion into a somewhat context, basically to talk about the European Green Deal, because this is well known within the EU, but according to my experience, there are very mixed views and unclear views that what does it mean outside of the European Union. I would start with the important change which takes place every 5 years. This is the change of guard at the top of the European Commission. The new Commission, led by President von der Leyen, took over only in last December. But I can tell you that looking now back, this looks like a different era, because the work has started under the expectations that the focus will be on the existing already major challenges for the EU, starting with the Brexit, the departure of the United Kingdom from the Union, which is the first ever departure of a member state, and besides quite a large and important member state. The ongoing trade conflicts, you could say even trade war in some cases with the United States, trade tensions with China, with Russia, and a number of other countries. The new Commission has set one of the major objectives to implement the mentioned Green Deal, which has been a reaction to the fast deteriorating situation of the globe, and especially the fast increasing negative impacts of climate change. But of course, this is a much broader issue, and the agriculture-related aspects are only one part of it. Why climate change? Because it has become clear that due to the human activity in the past period, which has been increasing its impacts increased in the last decades, there are such changes which have already started in the global climate, which threaten with making increasing parts of the globe inhabitable, starting with the increase of sea level, which can go into, even in the worst case scenario, dozens of meters, submerging full countries, not to mention island states, but also the increasing erratic nature of the weather, the increasing strength of tornadoes, of extremes, extreme cold, extreme drought, in recent period, especially extreme drought. So this was the background for launching the Green Deal. The Green Deal's agriculture-related aspects are what are of probably close interest to you who listen this webinar, related to the new goals of what is called sustainable food systems. Sustainable means that all the environmental impacts of food production have to be taken into account, and it has to be ensured that the production of food has a smaller carbon footprint, to use this term, which is now quite frequent. So basically, glasshouse impact than has been the case before. Why is it so? There are a number of branches of agriculture, starting with animal husbandry, which is a major contributor to the climate change through the exhaust, especially of animals like cattle and other ruminants, of methane into the atmosphere, being a greenhouse effect. But there are also other non-sustainable practices. The dumping of large amounts of fertilizers on the various areas, and a big part of it is washed away with the increasingly strong rains into the rivers, and fundamentally changes the rivers ecosystems. There is also an increased use of various pesticides and insecticides, and I will speak soon about it in more detail. All this means that the emphasis is not just on having, which has been so far, high quality and at the same time affordable food for the consumers in the EU, but also elsewhere, but also to have this food produced under sustainable conditions. This has impacts on all the trade partners of the EU, because the past period has also shown, and here I have to refer especially to the recent few months, already the period of the coronavirus crisis, when it turned out that for many inputs, and including even some types of food, the European Union has become so much exposed and dependent on faraway regions that when the transport links have become broken down, with the stopping, for instance, of the practical stop of air traffic, or due to the various export controls introduced by a number of the EU's trade partners, suddenly the physical security of food supply has become a question. This was never the question before. Earlier, very often the oversupply or overproduction of food has been a problem. But under these very new conditions, the EU has recognized that it has to ensure that even in a crisis situation like the present one, and of course nobody can forecast how long it will last and how deep its economic, health and other impacts will be. So even under such a crisis situation, there are safe, reliable sources of food supply. And here I have to immediately to speak about Ukraine. Ukraine is not just directly neighboring the EU, but Ukraine has very competitive and favorable natural conditions for producing food, especially plant products, which have become a major element of its export to the EU. It is geographically close, so the supply of food from Ukraine is much safer than could be from faraway regions. There is a free trade agreement, a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement with Ukraine, which ensures that the food is supplied under harmonized conditions, and the EU's regulatory framework is more and more taken over by Ukraine. So a healthy and safe source of food is ensured by our trade relations between the EU and Ukraine. As I mentioned, it's also important that under what conditions this food is supplied, and this refers to the mentioned pesticides and insecticides, but also other types of chemicals, additives, which are used in the food production, but also during the transport, the packaging of food, and all other elements which have environmental impacts. The EU would like to convince the other members of the global community, which need convincing, that the global transition to this mentioned sustainable food production and food supply should be a common goal of the humanity due to the survival of the humanity. Let me turn to the second program, which has been launched also at the same time as the previous strategy, the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. This is a long-term plan for protecting the nature and to prevent the mentioned degradation of the ecosystem. This again consists of various elements, but I would like to focus on the two areas which are closest to the field of expertise and the responsibility of my colleague, Mrs. Olga Shevchenko, that is the use of plant protection means and chemicals and animal health protection. Why are these important from the EU's point of view? It has been shown by the fact that beyond the broader climate change impacts of food production, there are also rather close-by impacts. For instance, the extended use of various types of plant protection chemicals, which has the impact of the pollinators on the bees to reduce to a very considerable extent the bee population, which for non-experts doesn't seem to be such a major issue, but in reality, according to experts, if one way or another the pollinators, the bees, were to disappear from the earth, from the globe, the production of agriculture, especially of plants, would stop in 4 years' time. And if there are no plants, also the animals and the humans who eat plants and during animal husbandry, where plants are converted into meat and dairy product, also these would not be available. The purpose is therefore to ensure that in both of these areas, the production methods are fundamentally changed. I would like to finish and if needed, I will be able to go into details, that these goals are admittedly not without controversy, even within the EU. There are major disputes among member states which have various priorities. There are major disputes among the green politicians and the green organizations and the farmers. Farmers are concerned, especially under the present conditions, about the huge fall in demand for their products, and they cannot afford on top of it even to lose the best and most effective chemicals, be it pesticides or insecticides, which, however, exactly because they are so effective, are also most damaging for the natural environment. But there are also other disputes, even within countries, not just among member states. And it is difficult to foresee at this stage that when and how these Commission proposals will be put into practice in the coming period. Thank you.
My apologies, I will repeat again. Ambassador Balash, thank you very much for your overview. In order to steer the discussion, let me ask you a few questions that will clarify these figures and trends that you shared with us for our audience. First, we understand that these, of course, Commission policy objectives suggested to consider by the member states and to adopt in the legislation. We understand that yet, can you confirm these are yet to be approved through the member states, and the time frame is approximately, it will not take place now, but rather within the next years through the EU legislative cycle, correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And then do I understand correctly that once it's put into legislation, these policy objectives are geared to ensure the same rules that are applicable to European agri-food producers? How it will translate in principle into rules that would apply to third country exporters, such as exporters from Ukraine? It will look like, apparently, like non-tariff rules applicable to the quality of the products or the production method. Can you clarify that?
Well, I would split my reply into two parts. What is undoubted, that the EU will require the same level of standards when it comes to the impacts of the food imported from the trade partners in their products than those which are demanded from the EU producers. So this is the reason that there are so very visible and major clashes with such countries as, for instance, the United States, which has a much more, let us say, liberal approach to the various technologies ensuring, in their view, food safety. For instance, they do not require what is the case in the EU, but also in Ukraine for the companies exporting to the EU, that poultry be produced in a salmonella-free manner. But they are, in the US, it is allowed that the poultry products which might be full of salmonella thereafter are simply washed down in a chlorine solution, and this is the famous chlorinated chicken. Europe says, no thank you, if you want, you keep it to yourself, but we don't need it. Similar big disputes are focused about the use of animal growth hormones, which is again a very broad practice, not just in the US, but also in other overseas countries, but with many of which have been found to have effects and getting through the food chain also into the human bodies with very undesirable long-term hormonal impacts. So when it comes to the imported product quality, then this is undoubtedly, even if this demand and the requirement, even if this leads to trade disputes, but the EU is not ready for any compromises in this area. I would just mention that now the UK, which is just left the EU and it is still in a transition period at the end of this year, is a rather difficult situation because the UK would like to sign free trade agreement, first of all, with the EU or some kind of agreement, which is still under consideration to maintain as much as possible of the earlier economic links, but at the same time wishes to sign a free trade agreement also with the United States. And when it comes to these food security issues, it gets very different expectations from both sides. But the real big question is the conditions of the production, because here the regulations, international, even WTO regulations are not so crystal clear. Basically, to what extent is it possible to ask from the trade partners, not just to ensure that the products are healthy and safe, but also that they are produced under such conditions which do not damage the environment. This is clear, for instance, in the case of, which is an important moral issue for the EU, animal welfare, but it's also a health issue. Under what conditions chicken, pigs, and other animals are kept and bred, and whether are these conditions acceptable for the EU producers. There are also other elements of the production conditions, like the mentioned degradation of the natural environment, which seemingly affects only the given producing country, but in reality, due to the global interlinkages, it has also impacts on the whole globe, including on the EU.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now we would like to turn to Ms. Olga Shevchenko. Olga, we would be very much interested to hear your comments to this policy, new future policy trends on agri-food production and trade that would be coming to us from the EU in maybe less than few years. Perhaps to facilitate your comments and discussions, I would ask a few questions that probably will help our audience to understand better. First, how the regulator, the Food Safety Service, is already, to what extent we can say that we are prepared to deal with these policy trends as they are already now in the EU legislation, using the association agreement mechanism, particularly as we work on Annex 5. Second, how do you think we will be able to adapt and help our producers to adapt to the new rules using, again, the association agreement mechanisms and approximating our legislation? And perhaps the last question that I think our viewers would be interested to know, how the service would be able to communicate and to educate our exporters on what to expect. Please feel free to comment as you see fit.
Thank you, Nazar. I would like to welcome the audience and thanks for this good invitation. Especially, it's my first time to have this discussion in expert talks. Also, I would like briefly to comment in general the excellent presentation of Ambassador Balish, and I think it's a good example how the quite comprehensive and complicated strategy can be put in such brief explanation. Frankly speaking, I would like to divide my comment on 2 points. The first one, I'm totally, as an expert, agree with the strategy of the European Union to have a healthy people and the planet, and especially that's important from the point of view of influence on the global climate change, and that's come back to some particular circle as a climate change also influence on the spreading of animal disease, and animal disease lead to use of some particular drugs and substances, and so you see the quite common hard circle in which we need to find the right solution to have the safe planet and to have a safe and healthy people, and don't forget about the global security as all the tasks of the governments to have health people to do all the necessary approaches to this, but of course to provide safe food products and enough food for all the global society. From the point of view of the expert influence, especially as Ukraine, and of course we are now in the process of acquainting and considering what changes already done in European legislation, but of course which one are announced to be done in the next strategical period, because now we already know about some particular changes for this year, and of course we are aware and understand that the system will be changed for the announced 2030 as the use of 2 particular directions area. One is of course plant product, plant health and plant production, and another one is animal health and animal production. What can be interested to audience, and then we can transmit to how they should be prepared. Then we're talking about the expert to European Union. For now, there's a quite big discussion concerning the number and use and influence on the health of particular pesticides, antimicrobial drugs, and other. It's really important. What we need to always to think about is the main goals why these all regulations in SPS and sanitary and phytosanitary area are done. The obligation of any government to provide the human health via the different measures, SPS measures, which influence on the plant and animal health in total. So what the strategy of European Union in reduction of use of pesticides and antimicrobials, and declination of some particular pesticides which, for example, are considered by the society as a hazard or can influence negatively on the human health. In this case, of course, the strategy needs to be scientifically based. It's one of the most important pillar for any decision which is done by the regulators, including European Commission and including Ukraine. When we're talking about the association agreement in the perspective of already named today Annex 5, actually it's a strategy, sanitary and phytosanitary strategy for Ukraine in harmonization of Ukrainian legislation to European legislation. What it means in practice? Of course, we one of the biggest suppliers of food products of animal and plant origin to European market, and we have a quite important challenges on which we need always to think. If we will, for example, have the particular examples. So what you can expect in case of change of regulation. We, the exporter and the government, obligated to fulfill all export requirements when we export Ukrainian products to any market. And in this case, European Union, it's not an exemption. So this means, of course, that in case of changes of requirements and regulations, it will be influence on Ukrainian exports, it obviously. But what particularly it means to Ukraine? For example, if we're talking about the pesticides, my apology, we have a quite big assessment on the market of pesticides which are used in Ukraine. Ukraine is the biggest producer of different plant products. So in particular, in the case of changes of use of pesticides in other countries, it will influence for Ukrainian production, especially for exporters. So let's divide the national and export market. If we're talking about national market, we have the list of approved chemicals, for example, which we approve to use. There is a limit that checked and monitor in any food products which are circulated in Ukraine and trade in Ukraine, of course. But in case of change of regulations of our trade partners, in particular, it will mean that we need to play with the new game within the rules. And in case that the exporters who want to achieve the market, for example, the European Union, in this case, it will mean that they will need to know the new rules, of course, and they will need to play with these rules. If some particular pesticides will be prohibited to use in European Union, they will establish appropriate maximum residues levels for food products. And automatically it will mean that if exporters in Ukraine will use the pesticides prohibited in European market, this will be monitored and checked during the procedure of state control on the border. So this means that in this case we will receive notification that products are not compliant with European regulation. So for us as a governmental, the main pillar, what we need to do now is to inform our business that the rules in European market changing. Of course, in parallel, we do the negotiations as in any country in the world via WTO concerning the possible influence on the trade, concerning the transitional periods which need to our business, as we protect our business as well, to have enough time to start to find the new pesticides which are not prohibited, for example, in European market. So it's some period. Of course, it will influence on the economical part, because then you use particular chemicals. It's a technology which fully operational, but then you need to find the new chemicals for trade. For example, today it will be European Union, tomorrow it will be another countries with another rules. So as an exporter, we in position, then we need to know what is happening around our country when we trade. We need to know how to react in this case, and that's why we try to maximum inform the business via associations, via our official website, that something will be changed. Because usually when you use a new SPS rule, you need to inform other countries in advance. And we already informed about these changes of antimicrobial and pesticides and chemicals regulations in European Union. And we already work on particular cases, and we see that, for example, for some pesticides, the registration and approval to use in Ukraine is up to 25 years. So what does it mean in practice? The particular number of market can be lost. So what to do for business in order not to be in the position that they will block to export? You need to of course, to receive the information that something is changing, you need to assess what pesticides or what antibiotics or other products you use. If they, for example, approved in Ukraine but prohibited in European Union, you find which new products you can use in the future, and it needs to be done in advance before the period of harvesting is started. And if we're talking about the association agreement in general, we are in the process of harmonization in legislation. And in the final, it will mean for Ukraine that we will need to follow the changes of the use of pesticides, antibiotics, and other products in European Union in order to harmonize it in Ukraine, but taking into account the national regulations. It's a brief, but probably it's quite comprehensive question. And my personal idea that, first of all, for business, they need to be well informed, and it's the task of a government. They need to know how to react in case of changes, and of course they will need some economical input from their own business to get timely preparation for the changes of any input regulation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga, for your comment. Ambassador, do you want to add anything to that? And perhaps I would also give a certain, let's say, orientation point, if I may. Very obviously that from farm to fork policy objectives pursue two goals. One, of course, is to address the danger of climate change and degradation of environment. On the other hand, it's also about establishing rules equal for all, or how the British say, level the playing field. However, we understand that in order to this to be set in stone in terms of your legislation, there must be a consensus among member states, and we all understand that each and every member state has its own composition of agricultural sector, own interests, etc. So probably time frame to put these policy objectives into legislation will be discussed. They may be amended. Also, Ukraine has a totally different composition and strength of the agricultural sector. And our capabilities from the point of view of our producers can be different than those of European peers. Do you think, what is the room for a dialogue between European Union and Ukraine in order to help Ukrainian producers eventually to adapt, maybe to have a better time frame for adaptation? Whether the association agreement offer us such opportunities, mechanisms, and avenues of dialogue. You, as a co-architect of the association agreement, knows better than anyone else what are the avenues. If you can comment on that, please.
Well, first of all, it was very reassuring to hear again and confirmed by Madam Shevchenko that the Ukrainian government and also the Ukrainian parliament continues to push ahead with the gradual harmonization of the EU rules and regulations in all areas, and in this case in the health and SPS areas, because it ensures that there will be less and less regulatory differences between Ukraine and the EU, and less areas of potential trade conflict. The situation is such that when it comes to, as I mentioned, to products, then it is relatively easier to ensure a consistent approach. When it comes to the conditions of production, this is a controversial even within the EU. Let me give you an example, and Ms. Shevchenko also referred to it: the use of pesticides even in the EU member states. it has been already established that there are certain pesticides are proven, have proven negative health impacts. Some of them are even carcinogenic. And for this reason, the decision was taken to phase out their use. However, considering also to a certain extent the major concerns of the farmers, of the agricultural producers, some transition period has been given. Now, what happened that this transition period has started a tendency that under the pressure of agricultural producer organizations and member states interested in the use of these chemicals, the transition periods have become routinely and repeatedly extended. So even such chemicals, for instance, pesticides, could remain on the market whose negative health effects has been proven. Therefore, the Commission has decided to be much more decisive in this respect than was the case before. And from this point of view, the present coronavirus crisis creates also not just damages, overwhelmingly. Of course, this is not without question that this is a huge blow to human health and also to the economies, but also to use this crisis situation and the major changes which were brought about by this crisis situation to speed up and the transition to the use of safer chemicals, also by financial means. In other ways, to use the new huge funds which have been proposed by the European Commission based on a German-French initiative to have a dedicated 750 billion recovery fund to be used with very little conditionalities for dealing with the impacts of the coronavirus case, and there is also quite high freedom for the member states to decide that what they consider as being linked to the virus impacts. And this gives an opportunity to take over substantial parts of the costs for making the transition, for instance, in the example I given, for the use of safer chemicals. This will be also an issue in the other parallel running exercise, the next 7-year budget of the EU, which should be adopted to enter into force after the departure of the UK from 2021 and running for the following 7 years. So apart from regulations, also financial means are used to help the agricultural producers. Another example is the collection and separated collection of recyclable materials, plastics, metals, paper, all kinds of materials, which earlier very often have been only pollutants, but if they're separated collection and thereafter environmental friendly recycling is ensured, they can ensure even additional economic gains. And this is also true for the farmers who can use, for instance, the organic residues, organic materials to produce electricity or for heating, and this kind of investments are also increasingly supported from European sources.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Olga, would you like to add anything to that? I think we sensed a few encouraging remarks from Ambassador Balazs's comments, that there are opportunities even from this very stringent policy objectives that may come for our producers. You name organics, you name, for instance, a procession of, we call it вторсировина, the waste, etc. What do you think?
Thank you. Actually, I think it's quite important that it was raised, especially in view of organic use and the general strategy. And we can see that in this global approaches, organic is quite important for a country becoming not just like exporter of organic products, but as well as use, for example, it was said, of the food contact materials which are safe to be used in food production. And it's important, especially when we're talking about, again, the influence on the environment, when we use it, like you say, not waste, but the production that can be recyclable, reused for the future. And from this point of view, it's important that the products must be safe. But of course, we need to find the new types and new approaches to use, because again, it's the materials which used in any case somehow to contact with the food, and the food not just need to be safe, but also the products are used for transport, for packaging, for including colorings, flavorings. They all need to be checked. And of course, now the tendencies are changing in the world, and some particular used even additives can be found not that are not good influence on the health. And we always need to remember that every day, every month, something changes, and we need to follow this. Organic approach, it's a complicated approach, but we see the big demand of global market, and the market of organic products also now dealing in Ukraine with the new approaches, and they try to follow all the standards, again, to be present in other markets. Of course, organic production for Ukraine is something new and need to be appropriately legislatively supported. But if you say about the future extent on the future human health, we need to put a big inputs in organic production sector and use of health products. That's my personal opinion. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Unless Ambassador Balazs would like to add any further comments to this one, I have also to keep track of our time. We have completed the phase of discussions of our webinar, and then I'm very pleased to move to a Q&A session. We have received quite many questions from our audience, and again, we have been, as Tatiana Miskova said earlier, we were trying to use as many, to use the questions in order to guide our presentations. At the same time, we chose a few questions which we think are the most relevant, first to the topic of our presentation, and also to the interests which reflect most of all the interests of our exporters. So we have three. We have distilled three questions to our speakers, and I invite both Ambassador Balazs and Olga to choose when and how to respond. The first question reads as follows: influence of from field to fork strategy on demand of Ukrainian organic foods. I think basically we already covered that in our last 10 minutes of the discussion. So unless I think the very clear message was from our speakers that there are opportunities but the organic goods regulatory regime is a little bit complex, and many other elements have to be taken into account. I think I wonder whether Ambassador Balash wants to add to respond to these questions in greater detail.
Well, I can very briefly just to mention that really organic foods, bioproducts are in increasing demand in the EU. And in spite of the fact that the production costs, exactly because these products are grown or these plants are or animals are bred without the use of chemicals and or other polluting agents. Therefore, they are more expensive. As many other areas of life, I think that and this is a personal view, that the virus situation, and especially in this case, the economic impacts of the virus have probably somewhat pushed back the demand for these higher priced products, as a large number of people have become worldwide jobless. There is a very fast growing unemployment also in the EU, and not just among the what you could say poorer parts of the population, but even in some sectors which have been especially hard hit by the virus, especially in, for instance, hotels and restaurant businesses. People have been fired by the thousands, even by single hotel chains or in various counties, and also people who had well-to-do, who had really ensured economic conditions and living standards suddenly found themselves out of work. And very often these people were the consumers of these higher priced organic products. So I think that the consumer base has somewhat decreased, and it will take some time in parallel with the economic recovery of all the countries affected by the virus, also until there will be a recovery of demand for these organic products.
Perfect, thank you. Olga, would you like to add anything to that, or shall we move to the next question?
I would like to agree with Ambassador Balash about the general situation of influence of pandemic COVID-19 on the worldwide society, especially from the economical part of view. But my personal knowing of some particular good cases of organic present in the other markets shows that Ukraine is able, and we need not to stop these good tendencies to work on organic standards, and of course to try to fulfill it in this level. And it's important that the global approach in this case will take into account the situation, especially this year. But I do believe that the possibility on improve of the organic standards in the world will be fulfilled in a good way, especially on the demand in society for consumers. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you. We move then to the next question. We have discussed, let's say, the situation, the policy and regulatory prospects for agri-food products, which we can call bulk products, right? We have a question: what are the demands? What are the prospects, demand trends for so-called niche agricultural products in the EU market that could be imported from Ukraine? Both, let's say, from the perspective of this new approach of the greening of the EU from farm to fork strategy, and also considering Ukraine's advantages. How would you comment the niche products case? Ambassador?
Well, this issue to a certain extent is overlaps, but not fully with the just completed discussion about organic products. When one speaks about niche products, which are consumed by a smaller part of the consumers and which satisfy specific consumption preferences or needs, then I think that the most important effect in this case is the major fallback of tourism. There are a large number of EU member states, especially the southern member states, but even countries like France or the now departed UK, where tourism is a major area of the economy. And due to the travel restrictions, and not just the restrictions, but the voluntary caution of of many people who used to travel regularly abroad now are much more cautious because of the health, the COVID risks. It means that for these niche products, there is a much lower demand. I hope that this is just a transitional situation, but until the high class 3-star Michelin star restaurants can not just reopen, but can be filled by well-paying foreign tourists. This is true as much to Ukraine as this is true in many EU member states where tourism is an important economy. Until this will happen, there will be, I think, a more limited demand for niche products.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you. Olga, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, probably a few. The situation, of course, changed due to the world pandemic, but we need the influence on the particular expert, especially when talking about small and medium business, will be assessed in not now, but later, of course. And the touristic season changed, but what would I recommend to pay attention is processed products, and it's always the product that less require additional, let's say, import regulations, but can be the one that used in trade with the countries. Of course, the traditional products which are trade, they will be the same. We will need to see the tendencies in the trade over the next few months and take in that situation we have now. And we will see what can be done in the world trade, because in any case, we already see the change of trade between countries. Of course, the range of products also changing due to the economical situation of every country, and we need to follow this, and then we will need time to timely react in case there will be demand on particular products which can be considered as a niche one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Olga. And now we are moving to the last question from our viewers. And I'm glad that, Olga, you mentioned processed agri-food products. There is no secret that our producers are very eager and keen to escape this trap of low value added, production cycle. They would like to move up the ladder and to produce more processed food quality, high quality products, demonstrating their industriousness, their inventiveness, ability to market themselves. The question we received is very typical, very, it screams out loud. What is the importance of the presence of a trademark or a brand in agri-food products, particularly now when the competition, let's say when we have complete uncertainty in terms of delivery and availability of agri-food products on our shelves? Perhaps I may add to that a very unique marketing tool available to agri-food products like agricultural indications, geographical indications. So what would you recommend to our producers in this respect? What are the general trends? What are the prospects? And what should they think about? Ambassador?
Well, I think that one of the positive impacts for Ukraine in particular, the virus is the much more difficult availability and more expensive availability of especially fresh products from overseas. These can be sometimes branded products which have a geographical indication, not only processed products, but fresh products. And with the breakdown the international air transport, it is economically, but also from a climate point of view, will be less and less acceptable that fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, flowers are imported into the EU from 10,000 kilometers or away. So this is only part of the reply. But getting to the core question of the branded products, where Ukraine has a very good chance is that due to both the geographical and the climate conditions, and also due to the experience of the Ukraine and good knowledge of the Ukrainian farmers and the large agricultural companies, the quality of the Ukrainian products, be it both plant-based but also animal-based products, is normally excellent. So they can be processed and sold as branded products with much success. This, however, needs investment. So branding these days is more and more expensive in spite of the possibility of using the internet, simply because everybody is using the internet. The competition for the viewers' attention is huge. So there are hundreds of brands from very similar products. And this is where I think that there is an opportunity for the Ukrainian producers and exporters to ensure that there are either some cooperation branding agreements to work with excuse me, well-established international chains.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I need a glass of water. Just a moment. In between, I pass the floor.
Please take your time, Ambassador. And perhaps, Olga, over to you. Would you like to add anything to this?
Of course, then I heard this question. I don't believe that somebody would like to receive the answer no. The trademark is important, but of course, producers, and they understand, and they need to understand which investments and strategical view and how many time it will take to have the brand which will be known. And frankly speaking, when I been in the shops and looking for, especially in the foreign markets, for products exported from Ukraine, because I'm as a governor know which type of products can be found in the markets, I always try to find something produced in Ukraine or with the mark of Ukraine, and sometimes I'm quite success to find, but it's a lonely cases, unfortunately. And what I can recommend, of course, it's a hard job to the trademark, to do it well known, to put investments in advertising, in doing the brand famous. But if we talking from the prospective side, it's quite important and quite reachable. And we have these successes stories for some brands in European market. And I also would like to agree with Ambassador Barash, especially on the fresh fruits and vegetables production and berries. And we exported quite a big number of these products to European market. And still there is a good opportunity to have the packaging in Ukraine with the trademarks. And I do believe that some kind of cooperations can be done in the future and cooperatives to have the export of fresh products as well, not just processed products. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If I may add just one sentence, which to what we had just heard, branding can mean commercial branding, so well-known international or regionally known brands, but also I think what you said, Madam Shevchenko, is the national brand of the product can be also important. I spent long years in Switzerland, and in Switzerland, simply that the Swiss cross was put on a product, it has immediately ensured a price markup and an increased demand by the Swiss consumers. I think that here all governments have an opportunity to increase this national brand consciousness among their own consumers to ensure that they specifically look similarly as you do for national products.
Perfect. Thank you very much, our speakers. Our time is up. We have to stick to the time and the courtesy of Export Promotion Office. I think on behalf of the UBTA team, and I would like to thank Ambassador Balash, and I would like to thank Ms. Shevchenko, acting head of the Food Safety Service, for their insights. Insights about what we should expect next, not today, but tomorrow, for our exporters in terms of regulatory barriers for agri-food products on the EU market. This is the task that we at our association are setting for ourselves to prepare the Ukrainian agricultural sector for the challenges that may be coming our way faster than expected. The times are changing fast and we must be prepared for that. Once again, thank you. It was a pleasure once again to host and to lead this discussion together with our government representatives and our European experts. We look forward to our next webinars where we are trying to keep abreast and to inform our exporters of what comes next. Thank you, Ambassador, once again, and thank you, Ms. Shevchenko, Olga, for your time and for your effort.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.